Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar titled Geocortex Workflow, from Complex Business Processes to Simple End-User Interactions. Today is April 25th. My name is Drew Millen. I'm the Director of Products at Latitude Geographics, and I'm excited to be joining you today for a short presentation about some ideas that we have for automating guided user interactions in web mapping applications. Today, we're going to share an idea about how we can automate end-user interactions, and in fact, how to build an entire applications that are based on workflows. We have technology that supports this idea, but I hope that people can be inspired by this and build applications using these philosophies, even if they aren't using Geocortex technology. Some of you may be existing Geocortex customers and wanting to understand what's the latest and greatest with our workflow technology, and some of you might be new to Geocortex. In both cases, I think there should be some value to share. We've got some slides, and I'll also have some demonstrations. And at the end, I'll answer some questions. So if you have any during the webinar, please feel free to use the chat window, and I'll address as many questions as I can at the end of the presentation. And we'll also provide a written Q&A as a follow-up. Well, I mentioned that we would have some demos, so I'm actually going to start this presentation with a demonstration and discuss what it is that we're looking at. I'm going to switch now to my web browser, where I have a very simple application. This is an HTML website that's a citizen service request reporting tool. I think many of you might have seen applications like this where citizens are able to submit service requests in their neighborhoods. The user can zoom in and notice that I'm being prompted to touch on the map where I want to submit my service request. As soon as I click on that location, I'm prompted to confirm that I'm satisfied with that area. Then the user is selecting the type of service that we want to request service for. So let's presume that there's some graffiti here. I'll enter my name and go ahead and submit that. It's going to upload this point into the geo database underneath this map. So behind the scenes, we're actually editing a feature layer that belongs to an ArcGIS server. At this point, the user is being challenged if they want to attach a photo to this service request, and I'll just skip that step for now. Notice that my new service request has been plotted on the map. That was a really, really simple application that we've built. Now I want to make a couple of observations about it. It serves a very simple purpose. It's a targeted application aimed at a simple business problem. It was really easy to use from an end user perspective. No training was required. It works just as well on a mobile device such as the iPhone that you can see the demonstration on the right-hand side of your screen. And there's also some sophisticated functionality, but it's hidden from the user. For example, we're querying a database, buffering the point that was clicked to zoom into an appropriate area, performing some feature editing, potentially uploading attachments, and sending emails at the end. We'll come back to how this application was built later in the webinar. But I want to emphasize that to do this, no coding was required. This was an entirely configured application. One of the challenges we face is that workflow is a really common term, and a lot of people have preconceived notions of what a workflow is. Perhaps you've used some form of workflow technology in your organization in the past. Here, for example, is the design tool that comes with K2, which is a workflow automation tool. Here's another one from Nintex. And in the Esri ecosystem, we have ArcGIS Workflow Manager. All of these are workflow tools, and having used some of them, we may have a notion of what a workflow is. It's typically multiple users engaged at different stages of a business process. It can combine both manual and automated steps. They're typically long running, so they can last hours or even days or weeks. And in those cases, we need some form of tracking. What status is the workflow at? Is the job complete? Who is assigned to the next step? And how far are we towards completion? These are really valuable workflows, but Geocortex Workflow is different. It's different because we're focusing on a different set of common challenges that we see organizations facing when building, deploying, and maintaining web mapping applications using Esri technology. Let's talk about some of those challenges. When we talk to GIS department administrators or GIS managers who are charged with delivering applications to the organization, they often start with business analysis and talking to their end users, asking questions like, which layers and tools do you guys need? Now, the response is quite common. Well, we want all of the data you have. Please put all of the layers on the map, and we're not really sure how we're going to use it yet, so please fill the toolbar with all of the tools you can. And the result is this: a very monolithic, heavy lifting WebGIS application that's difficult to use. The challenge is that some users coming to this application might not know what to do or how to use GIS technology, how to understand GIS terminology, and other users still might be completely alienated. You can overcorrect this problem as well by providing something that's too simple. This doesn't have access to the layers of data that users need, or it doesn't have access to the functionality that they need to get their work done. So challenge number one is that WebGIS apps often require complex functionality and are hard to use. Therefore, workflows must make applications easy for end users while still powerful enough to do everything we need. In the example we saw, the user simply clicked on the map, presented some data in a form, and behind the scenes, we're doing the complex heavy lifting of updating database records or sending emails. Workflows represent themselves as intuitive and guided interactions for end users so that we can collect form data, ask the user to capture some geometry on the map, perform map automation, generate reports and other things that result in the work product of a workflow or an end user interaction. Another common challenge that we see is that there's a trend towards creating targeted and purposeful applications for different groups of users. A certain set of users might need an application for one purpose and another group of users for another purpose. And an executive comes along and wants an application specifically made for them. Each of these applications has different tools and features. They may be sharing some common aspects like similar map services and similar base maps. But it becomes difficult to create all of these applications and to maintain them. And there's an ongoing incoming request for new applications demanded by your end users. How do we keep up with the demand of all of these applications and create functionality that's needed in efficient ways? So common challenge number two is summarized as, I need targeted apps for each business need. Each of these has unique requirements. Therefore, workflows must be easy and fast to build so that the administrator experience is straightforward. We need to be able to automate complex tasks and do this without writing code and not needing the development skills that's required to write custom code. We should be able to do this in a fraction of the time required by custom development. Workflow achieves this by providing an out-of-the-box library of activities. These are tested, written units of functionality that do common things. So you can choose from this library to create and automate tasks. In this example, we'll choose the activity to get the current user, then display a form asking the user some questions, perhaps use the results of that form to perform a query and a geoprocessing task, as the results from that query are the inputs to the geoprocessing task. The outputs of the geoprocessing task feed into a CSV file which is written to the disk. All of those functions, executing a geoprocessing task, querying a database, getting the current user from the browser session, converting a data table to a CSV file, those are already written, saving you time. They're also thoroughly tested. So you can simply chain these together to automate your business tasks. And the result is a functional and highly visual description of your business process as well. So that when you walk away, it's easy for another developer or another administrator to understand what it is that your application is doing and how it works. Another challenge that we see, and this is one that's a little bit more long-term, is this challenge of technology change. We've got a timeline that we can see along the bottom here, ranging from 2008 all the way up to today. We've been around building web mapping applications for organizations really since 2001 in the ArcIMS era. But in the more recent world, we've seen organizations invest in functionality on top of WebADF, finding themselves forced to reinvest in that same functionality because the technology changed and there was new technology available in Flex and Silverlight. Maybe they added new features at this time, but they've had to rewrite a substantial portion of the application that was already being provided in a previous generation technology. This is happening again today as newer technologies are surpassing limitations of plugins like Flex and Silverlight. HTML5 and Esri's JavaScript API provide new ways of building applications, so once again we're rewriting. And even as it stands, we may have applications that are built on the ArcGIS API for JavaScript 3.x. The current version is 3.20. And thinking about migrating these applications to a brand new version of that API labeled 4.3. This is expensive to keep rewriting functionality as opposed to adding net new functionality to your organization and therefore adding new business value. So common challenge number 3 is that technology change is causing rewrites of existing functionality. Therefore, workflows must be technology agnostic and resistant to technology change. By allowing organizations to describe workflows using a visual design tool and persisting those workflows as files that can be interpreted by different types of applications, we can enable this. Geocortex Workflow is different from other workflow technologies because it's about making it easy to automate simple, guided end user interactions within web mapping applications. Now, Geocortex Workflow is part of a larger product called Geocortex Essentials, which provides a rich array of functionality for organizations to not just build, but also to maintain a variety of web mapping applications for their organization. We're just focusing on workflow today, but it's helpful to understand that it's part of a larger piece of software called Geocortex Essentials. With that said, at Latitude Geographics, we've recognized that workflow on its own is important enough to actually warrant a standalone product. One of the main reasons behind this is because the existing workflow technology that ships with Geocortex Essentials is only available in online environments. And we wanted to make workflow technology available even when you're disconnected from a network. For example, when you're out in the field using an iPad or Android device and you have no Wi-Fi or 3G connectivity. So we're building a new product that stands on its own called Geocortex Workflow. It integrates with Geocortex viewers and therefore Geocortex Essentials, but it also integrates with Web App Builder for ArcGIS. It uses a portal, whether that be ArcGIS Online or Portal for ArcGIS within ArcGIS Enterprise, for the storage and sharing of workflow items. And it's going to be made available in the ArcGIS Marketplace and on geocortex.com this summer. Let's get out of the slideware for a bit and look at some other examples of how workflows can be used to build functionality or indeed entire applications. Here's another focused application that we built that drills into an area of interest in St. Clair County. The purpose of this application is to assess damage on properties following a flood. So you can see that there's these point icons representing damage assessments, and the underlying parcels are color-coded with assessment values. If we look at our layer list, we can see the assessed structure and assessed parcel iconography and symbology. I'm going to launch this workflow from the I Want To menu, and it allows the user to find properties of a certain assessment type. Find Damaged Properties is the item from the I Want To menu that launches our workflow. In this case, it's a simple workflow that prompts the user for the type of property to look for. So let's say I'm looking for properties with minor damage. The user has a choice to intersect that with the parcel layer. Right now, I'm going to opt not to. The map extent has changed to show me all of the properties with minor damage, my results list is populated, so I can hover over the results and see the corresponding entries on the map. Let's run this workflow again, this time choosing to intersect the underlying parcel layer. You'll notice that there's one of my results here, which is a minor damage property that doesn't intersect the parcel. This time I'll say, yes, I want to intersect with the parcel layer. And I'm going to get two types of results. The assessed structures, which I was just looking at before, but now also the assessed parcels, those that were intersected by the underlying geometry. That's a pretty basic workflow, but it does show some spatial intersection and some user interaction. I wanted to highlight it because it's a good example to show within the Geocortex Workflow Designer. This is the web-based design tool where we can automate the interactions like those that we've seen in these demos. I'm going to open up the workflow we were just looking at by browsing my documents and selecting the workflow file. Notice that this is a highly visual description of my workflow. And I've even got annotations on here for anyone who comes to the application to understand exactly what's happening. First, we display a form to our user. We make sure they click the submit button. That's what this condition is for. Then we query our properties layer. And if there's results, we determine if the user chose to intersect the parcels. If they don't, we simply select the properties. And if they do, we get the geometries and perform our second query using the geometries from this task. If there's results from that, then we're going to select those features as well as the features from the assessments layer, and then finally set the map extent. So that's a pretty basic workflow that we've seen here. I want to show how workflows can be modified on the fly. In this case, I'll modify my form. So I'll double click to edit this form, and you'll notice my toolbox change to present me with a list of items that I can add to my form. Let's add a horizontal rule, a couple of those after our drop down here, and we can add a text box and a checkbox, a drop down list. It's a drag and drop interface for designing my form. Let's assume that I needed these checkboxes and drop down lists and text entries on my form, and I'm satisfied with it. I can go back and save my workflow, persist it back to my documents, and then reload my application to see the changes. Now this workflow is persisted as a configuration file on the server. And as soon as it's loaded by the application, any configuration changes made are going to be honored. So the next time I run this workflow, you'll see that those two horizontal rules, our checkbox, and our drop-down list. The same workflow is portable and can be made available in Web App Builder for ArcGIS. Here's Web App Builder for ArcGIS consuming the same web map we saw a second ago. I'm going to go to the widget gallery and decide to add a widget to my header here. So I can see I've got my layer list and my legend. Now I want to add another widget that will run this workflow. We've built a workflow runner widget that you can add to Web App Builder applications. And you need to configure it by specifying which workflow to run. So I can select my content from ArcGIS Online, add the workflow that I want to run to my application, and then run it within Web App Builder. That's a different workflow, but you can see that we've got a form populating from the workflow that I selected in this application. Let's get a little bit more sophisticated with our workflows now. Here's a different application which focuses on parcel data in Los Angeles County. There's over 2.5 million parcels in Los Angeles County. It's the largest county in the United States. We wanted to provide users with the ability to search for parcels and find nearby parcels and generate a report by buffering an existing parcel. Again, we'll launch this workflow from the I Want To menu. We ultimately want to create a tax parcel report with our search results. First, we're going to enter the address we're looking for. You'll notice that as I'm typing, address values are automatically populating. Geocortex provides the ability to instantly search across these 2.5 million records. I'll just select an address at random. You'll notice that the map extent is updated, the parcel has been highlighted, and the user is presented with the next form. That's because Workflow automated the next 3 activities for me. The user doesn't have to zoom to the selected parcel or set the map extent or highlight the feature. All of those steps were automated by our workflow. And now I'm prompted to specify a buffer distance, let's say 150 feet. Now Workflow buffers the subject parcel by 150 feet. It draws our buffer graphic, and it's also highlighting the intersecting parcels that it discovered. The user can select a report they'd like to run. In this case, I'll run the mailing label report for those nearby parcels. This sends a request off to a Geocortex server where those properties are assembled into this printable mailing label report. So in this workflow, there's a few more sophisticated steps happening behind the scenes, but the end user still had a very simple step-by-step guided interaction. I'm going to sign into another application to show another example of a workflow. In this case, let's assume that we're a retailer and we've got store locations as well as competitive store locations plotted on our map here. And we're looking for a great place to insert a new store location. This is a common problem had by large retailers. So we can see we've got a customer base right around this road here, and this might be a good place for a store, but we still need to perform some demographic analysis of this location. So let's presume I want to plot my store here. In this case, I'm going to launch my workflow from this home panel. I'll click to get started now, and then the user is prompted to enter that location with this point tool. In this case, we're not using a form. We're suggesting that the user plot some geometry on the map. Now that I have my potential store location captured, I need to enter some information about it. The address has been automatically populated for me. So has a default name. I don't need to change that right now. It's just going to be one store. We'll call it a neighborhood retail electronics store. And I can add a description or attach documents if I like. This form has been configured using the workflow designer, just like we saw before. Now what I want to do is perform an analysis of the area. I can see that there's customers in here, but I don't really understand the demographics. To do that, I want to make sure that to my electronics store, customers have access to it within 5 minutes of driving. So let's do a drive time polygon. Here, we've integrated our workflow with a geoprocessing task. That generates this drive time polygon that I can intersect with underlying census data. Let's assume I'm looking for the household income profile within this demographic area. The user was presented with a list of demographic options, and now we're performing some geo-enrichment from ArcGIS Online to gather those demographic data. It's produced a report for me, so I can actually look at this service area, print it in a document, send it to my colleagues, say, hey, here's the store I'm thinking about, here's the 5-minute drive time, some basic information I've collected about it, and I've also gathered the household income profile that I selected. I've got a couple pages of data that were collected from ArcGIS Online to support this location. The workflow continues and allows me to email this data to my colleagues or to myself if I need to store it later. I'll skip the email for now. And then I can actually add the store as a permanent feature on the map. So I can either finish, this was just a temporary experiment, or if there's enough interest, I might actually add the store and it becomes a point on the map that I can further interrogate. So you can see that my icon transitioned into a store that belongs to our feature layer. I've got one other example that I want to show and another more sophisticated workflow being integrated with an application. In this case, we have oil and gas data, specifically pipeline data represented on a map. Now, some of these pipelines intersect parcels, and if I need to do some maintenance on a pipeline, I might need to notify nearby homeowners that there's work that needs to be done. I'm going to use the I want to menu and create a tax parcel report of potentially affected parcels on pipeline maintenance. But first, I need to select the section of pipeline I'm interested in. I'm being presented with a number of options for ways to do that. Let's choose to select a segment of pipeline using 2 stations. When I click Next, the user is prompted to select the first area of the pipeline. So I'll click on the pipeline there, and you'll notice I've got this elastic banding happening, and it's restricted to the length of the pipeline. I've selected my pipeline, but I need to select my first station where I'm performing maintenance. So let's go ahead and choose this area right here. And then the second area along this pipeline that maintenance might occur is right there. It's telling me the distance from the first station between the first and second station. When I click Done, we're highlighting that segment of pipeline, providing a summary of how many miles we're looking at, and zooming to that feature. When I hit Next, I'm going to intersect that with the properties, showing a property table of all of the owners that are intersected by that segment of pipeline. It's asking me now if I want to generate a report. Perhaps I'm satisfied with just exporting these results to Excel or exporting a shapefile of the parcels. Or I might actually want to create a formalized report. So those were a few demonstrations of how workflow technology can be used to automate end-user guided interactions within applications, but also to create entire purposeful applications out of purely workflows. These apps didn't have complex layer lists or complex toolbars. They were targeted at specific audiences. We understood the user need and automated workflows based on their feedback. The great thing about this is that if user requirements change, I can simply go back into my design tool and reconfigure a workflow and republish it for the next use. Workflow has been used by our customer base for several years, and we've got some great examples of where customers have saved money and time by using workflow technology in their environments. There's a couple that I'd like to highlight, starting with Bay Area Rapid Transit. If you've ever traveled down to the Bay Area, San Francisco, for example, you've probably ridden online one of these rail stations. They operate 46 stations across 112 miles of track, and they use workflow to streamline what was previously a paper-based process for doing track maintenance and repair. BART estimates that they're saving up to $1 million annually in operating labor by employing workflow, and it's expected to grow to $4 million when they link this to their asset management system. San Francisco Public Utilities Commission is another example customer who's leveraged workflow in a really interesting environment. They're using ArcGIS Survey 123 and Collector to collect information out in the field. From those surveys and collected data, they need to perform complex queries and bring all of that data together into a report. So they use Geocortex Workflow in conjunction with our reporting technology to consolidate all the field data that's collected and save large amounts of time to produce the reports that they need. They were previously photocopying and scanning documents and photos out of these surveys. Well, that's a quick introduction to Geocortex Workflow and the idea of how guided end-user interactions can help us create more targeted and purposeful apps, but also simple end-user interactions. I'm going to look now to see if any questions came in throughout the webinar. We have a few minutes to address those. And just a reminder that all of the questions that you're asking, we'll follow up with answers in a written format following this webinar. So the first question is, will this webinar be recorded? Yes, it is being recorded as we speak, and I believe it will be made available to attendees following the webinar. The second question deals with the citizen service request workflow that I demonstrated and asked if it was customizable. For example, can we add other tasks over time? And that is exactly the flexibility of workflow. We can absolutely customize that application simply by modifying the workflow underneath it. Just looking for more questions here. One of the questions is, what is the version of the workflow designer that you used in the seminar? So today I've been showcasing an upcoming Geocortex workflow technology that's aimed to be launched this summer prior to the Esri International User Conference. But Geocortex Workflow is part of Geocortex Essentials and has been made available for years. Another question is, how does Geocortex Workflow work with Web App Builder? Hopefully during the demonstration, I was able to illustrate that we can bring workflows inside of Web App Builder applications. How this works is that workflows themselves are small little configuration files. More specifically, it's a JSON file format. We also have a JavaScript API that can interpret and run these workflows. When I say run these workflows, it means presenting the form to the user and guiding the user along those interactions that's described by the workflow file. So we bring that API into a Web App Builder application via a widget. And then that widget can invoke the API in order to launch a workflow of the administrator's choosing. Another question is, what type of workflow training is available from Latitude Geographics? Well, on our existing Geocortex Workflow technology, we have several training courses that are available. I urge you to consult geocortex.com/training for details. But in short, we have a 2-day training course that provides an introduction to workflow concepts. And then we have more advanced courses that deal with performance, streamlining parallel tasks, advanced form configuration, etc. A question from what looks to be an existing customer, because it's specifically around the technology that we're using for our new workflow. The question is, will the new workflow use Microsoft Windows Workflow Foundation? Our existing workflow technology does use Microsoft's Windows Workflow Foundation. However, what we were looking at today is using our own workflow technology based in JavaScript. So the answer to that question is no. The new workflow uses a JavaScript runtime and not the .NET Workflow Foundation that we were previously using with our existing technology. It's a good question about the standalone workflow product. What is it expected to cost? We don't have exact numbers yet, but please do follow up with us directly and we can provide you a ballpark. I've got a question here about the last demonstration I provided. The elastic band that was shown on the pipeline work was awesome. Is that function currently available in Workflow Designer? Actually, in that case, we tapped into a capability that's provided in the Geocortex viewer. So our Geocortex viewer has a rich array of commands that can be invoked, and any of those commands can be executed from a workflow environment. So we cheated a little bit there by invoking the elastic banding functionality that we've provided inside of a Geocortex viewer. However, that functionality was invoked from an activity in a workflow. Is the new workflow product still going to be included with Geocortex Essentials? And I fear I forgot to mention that. Yes, it absolutely is. So all Geocortex Essentials licensees are simply entitled to the new Geocortex Workflow product as part of their ongoing maintenance or part of their subscription. New customers can buy Geocortex Workflow as a standalone product, or they can buy Geocortex Essentials, benefit from the viewer technology, and also leverage the new Geocortex Workflow product. I've got time for one more question, which I'll address right now. I see lots of good questions coming in, and I'll just repeat that all of these questions will be answered in a written format. So the last question is, will the new web-based workflow designer support workflows in our Geocortex mobile app framework? For those who aren't familiar, our Geocortex mobile app framework is technology we use to take web mapping applications offline on iPads, Androids, and Windows devices. The answer to that question is yes. One of the main reasons we've invested in building our new workflow technology is so that we can take workflows out into the field and offline. So we're excited to say that yes, that is entirely possible. Well, we're a few minutes over, so with that, I think I'll wrap the call at this point. Thank you so much for attending today. I hope there was some value that we provided. Bye for now.